Gotta keep doing it.
Okay, and just to be clear, I go down to move slides or over? Thank you. All right, Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Before I begin, I want to extend a deep thanks to Northeastern for having us and to the Carib Digital team for gathering us. The keynote yesterday, the panels have been amazing, and I'm very much grateful to be here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. My name is Nadejda Webb, and I'm the Assistant Director of Life Code, Digital Humanities Against Enclosure, and an Assistant Research Professor at Johns Hopkins. I am presenting an emerging project, Beyond a Haunting, which is part of the We Live Language Lab in the Life Code ecosystem. We Live Language explores the intersections of language, identity, and power. The Beyond a Haunting project team consists of myself and John Baines, our research software engineer and founder of Endeavor. We've also worked quite a bit with Tarika Sankar, who's in attendance today, so I want to shout her out as well. Now, to introduce you to the Beyond a Haunting project is to introduce you to my maternal grandmother, my nanny, Aisha Doris Baksh Prasad. This is an image my mother drew in 2023, 3 years after my nanny abruptly transitioned at the outset of the COVID pandemic. She was born in Wakenham, Guyana, and was a child of indenture. Her death, her unexpected disappearance, transports me back to my other disappeared, to the many ways in which their presence and absence ask us as descendants to grapple with who we are now. Beyond a Haunting is grief work and an inquiry. We examine how descendants of indentured laborers in places including Guyana, Trinidad, Jamaica, and Fiji grapple with their historical positioning and the effective weight of belonging memory and limited representation. Our current research question: what can small data tell us about the quotidian impacts of limited scale representation in the aftermath of trauma and erasure, grounds our investigation of social media as a site of multiple circulations, the colonial archive, and the ways in which descendants are writing back to empire. As this project has progressed, I found myself increasingly attentive to Homi Bhabha's question posed in his 1992 article, The World and the Home: what kind of narrative can house unfree people? Are examples of, quote, representations that recognize the binaries necessary for storytelling without reproducing binary characters available within this data set, or in the intramural conversations between descendants prompted by the circulation of archival images? And just to note that bit about examples that um, recognize the what's necessary for storytelling but without the binary characters, that's pulled from Marasa with a Difference, an article on Edwidge Danticat's one of her novels by Rosello. Pardon me, my brain just went a bit blank. Using computer-assisted multimodal discourse analysis and a culturally specific affect scale, we analyze comments in Creolized English from descendants living both home and abroad. One key site of our investigation is Cutlass Magazine. Founded in August 2020 by Trinidadian Vinay Harishan in response to a need for the Indo-Caribbean community and descendants of Indian indentureship to have a space to convene around our culture and history, CM catalogs cultural artifacts that have emerged out of indenture. During our initial pull, we collected almost 600 posts, nearly 20,000 comments, around 27,000 likes, and 39 archival posts. Before I further explore our treatment of CM, I want to anchor our orientation to scale in a bit more detail. So on the slide are two images. One is a, quote, Coolie Bell postcard from 1890. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Indian women were photographed in Jamaica, Trinidad, and British Guyana for a thriving postcard industry built on marketing the Caribbean as a holiday destination for Western tourists. As Gayatri Bahadur explains, what distinguishes the colonial photographs of indentured women as a historical source is that, unlike descriptions found in a traveler's tale or an immigration agent's report, we see them and they seemingly look back at us. These images don't simply document, they enact a struggle between the imaginations of colonial era photographers and the real lives of the women behind the portraits. Now, the second image is a screenshot I took in 2023 when I was scrolling through a Facebook group for folks from Wakenham living both home and abroad. In addition to the death of my nanny, I was really curious about the iterative lives of these images, the images of women in particular, and how they accrue meaning as they move through the interwebs or our digital yards. Now, the image that I found most interesting was of the woman looking this way. So she's not actually looking at us, at least not in this snapshot. When I tried to find this image to locate it in the archives, something that came up was Alamy. So Alamy is a stock website, a website that essentially just hosts stock images, right? Um, but this isn't a stock image. So what is the ontological impact of the label stock image on images like these, right? What data is being ordered and disordered here? As indigenous digital humanist Laura Harjo explains in Spiral to the Stars, scale functions in different ways, and I do not mean it as an index in a hierarchy of fixed geopolitical units. Rather, scale requires us to examine the processes that created the geopolitical unit. If the production of scale is often used to understand the ways in which capital moves, or Western and settler formations of territory, or the ordering of data, we meaning my project, we mobilize small data to localize our view and to attune to the felt knowledge of descendants. And just another quick note. So when I was able to locate some information about this image, it's actually a part of a series, and I did find the one where she's looking back at us. So this is from 1947, and I did find this really curious because in the way I was, so for me too, one of the questions was like, how are folks claiming ancestors, right? Especially on the interwebs. So this woman is not Guyanese; she's from Suriname, or actually, she's on the banks of the Suriname River, right? So there's a lot of that in itself is interesting to me, but we'll proceed. Okay. The central hypothesis of our project is that large pre-trained language models often fail to adequately capture the linguistic nuances, cultural references, and perspective of subcultural groups, commonly referred to as the long tail. Consequently, these models may systematically overlook or misrepresent certain viewpoints, expressions, and vernaculars, particularly those not prevalent in the training data of commercially available LLMs. These edge cases warrant intentional inclusion in data science and engineering research to ensure broader representational fidelity. To empirically examine this hypothesis, we extract a representative text sample from a public accessible source and train a domain-specific model to interpret it. The output of this custom model will then be compared to that of a widely used pre-trained LLM to evaluate discrepancies and assess the extent to which mainstream models reflect or obscure subcultural meaning. So one of the questions, there are two questions that I constantly come back to with this project is what does small data afford us, but also whose perspective? So in my case, or in our team's case, so I'm both a descendant and a researcher. John is the practitioner, he's a data scientist. John is not West Indian, he's not a descendant of indenture, he's African American. So as we're working through this data, both we query our own perspectives, but also the perspectives that are out in the world framing the data, right? So the current tools for sentiment analysis remain limited in their ability to adequately capture affect in a generational context. This experiment aims to examine those limitations and investigate methodologies for narrowing the gap. While we do not presume to fully capture the emotions or intentions underlying the interaction studied, we seek to enhance the interpretive fidelity of the analysis through more contextualized and precise handling of the underlying data. In doing so, we aim to shift the scale of understanding to more accurately reflect the perspectives of the community as it forms around a specific topic. Let me see. We also use the cutlass as a reference point to allow us to perceive multiple histories, more so herstories simultaneously. While the cutlass highlights the social and intimate relations among the indentured Indian women, Indian men, African workers, and their descendants within the post-emancipation period, when put into a relationship with the orni, or a headscarf typically used to demonstrate modesty in Adil Gosein's photo essay, Orni and Cutlass, the cutlass functions as much as a marker of oppression as evidence of the creative agency of women who lived through miserable conditions of colonialization. Within the context of the Cutlass magazine, we witness the cutlass wielded as a tool for archiving. And so to return back to the circulation of these images online, I also want to point to, so we've run this experiment. We're comparing um, my, I've ranked 2,000 comments. These comments have now been used to train a model that we've custom built. We're comparing this to 3 other models. Now, you see this movie review, this quote that says excellent, because one of these models is trained on movie reviews. Another one is trained on tweets. And the last one is essentially built on a dictionary. Thank you. Is essentially built on a dictionary developed by experts about the content. But these models, right? The way the treatment of this data doesn't it's not a one-to-one with the images that folks are responding to, for instance, right? How they're thinking about their position as descendants as they come into contact with these things in social media. So again, one of the models, this Silbert. So this is the one that is trained on about 12,000 movie reviews. Roberta is a model trained on 58 million tweets. And the rules-based, this is NLTK Vader. This is the model that is trained on a dictionary, essentially. So I show you here our comparison chart. We're not going to go through all of them, but I do want to point to this last one, right? So now, I'm looking for my notes from John, but I can't find it. Essentially, our model is closer to the fidelity of our data, right, than the rest of these models. And we can predict this, but to actually see it, I think, is something else. The other thing I failed to mention as I was going through was just the treatment of the image. Again, and I keep, during the keynote yesterday, there was a lot of talk about the impact of images in circulation and what this does to one's psyche, the impact of the representation. What does it mean to imagine an ancestor, an ancestor that looks like you or doesn't look like you, out in the world doing a thing that you haven't been able to do yourself? And so I keep circling back to the power of the image and the treatment of these images as we think about, right, the data on Instagram. Because especially for these pages, this is not merely just like random clips, right? It's not, they're not hyper generalized content. It's very specific content. So really what happens when we don't think about them as commodities? And we think about them within a set of relations. If we go back to the stock images, right, they're being commodified. A lot of erasure is happening as they're being commodified. So how do we push back against this? That brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you.